The Constitutional Court will conclude President Yoon's impeachment trial on Tuesday. A verdict is expected in mid-March. Trade authorities request that the U.S. government exempt Korea from its new tariff plans, while Korean business leaders emphasize the importance of stronger bilateral economic cooperation while in Washington this week. Amid a tense mood between the U.S. and Ukraine, Ukraine's president has met with Trump's envoy over a peace deal, after which he called the meeting productive. It's February 21st, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. The president's impeachment trial will come to a close next week with an 11th hearing that'll see the respective sides sharing their final remarks. Eyes are now on the upcoming verdict. Oh Soo-young has our top story.
President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial will conclude next Tuesday with his final statement at the Constitutional Court. The court announced Thursday at Yoon's 10th trial hearing that the next and final session would be held on February 25th, some 74 days after the impeachment vote passed at the National Assembly. The bench will review remaining evidence before the National Assembly's legal team and the president's lawyers each make their closing arguments. Then the Assembly's panel co-chair Chung Chung-rae and President Yoon will deliver their final remarks. The court on Thursday held the last round of witness examinations.
The questions focused on whether the president went through proper cabinet procedures before declaring martial law and whether he'd ordered arrests of key politicians and judicial figures.
First up was Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who said there had been anomalies in procedure and substance compared to a standard cabinet meeting. He said the defence minister had not consulted him before recommending martial law to the president, as required by the Constitution, and said no minutes were taken. Han stopped short of judging whether or not a legitimate cabinet meeting took place, saying that should be determined through investigative and judicial procedures. Former National Intelligence Service Deputy Director Hong Jang-won, who was a witness earlier this month, returned for further questioning by Yoon's legal team. Hong previously testified that he'd made note of 14 to 16 figures to arrest under martial law, claiming that he'd written it in the night outside the residence of his boss, Director Cho Tae-yong. He received the names from Defense Counterintelligence Commander Yoon, who Hong phoned as the president had told him to help out the commander. But Hong changed his words on Thursday, saying he had been in his office after all. His boss told the court last week that Hong had lied about his whereabouts, citing CCTV footage. As Hong and Yoon's lawyers clashed over the veracity of his note, which was reproduced and altered various times, the president spoke out, saying the debate misses the point. He said he'd called Hong to encourage him to work with Yoon hunting down spies, without mentioning martial law. He pointed out that Hong was the one who called the commander, made notes, and then held on to them until he was dismissed from the NIS. National Police Agency Chief Cho Ji-ho also stood witness after 2 absences due to illness. He refused to answer most questions due to his own criminal case, but said he testified truthfully to prosecutors. Cho had said Yoon called him 6 times on December 3rd and told him to arrest lawmakers. Based on past presidential impeachment trials, a verdict is likely to be reached within 2 weeks around March 11th. Former President Park Geun-hye's impeachment was upheld in 11 days, while former President Roh Moo-hyun's was dismissed in 14 days. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
In a separate development, the National Police Agency has booked President Yoon on charges of obstructing the execution of an arrest warrant last month. Shin Ha-young explains.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has been booked by the NPA for allegedly using the Presidential Security Service to block investigators' attempts to detain him last month over his declaration of martial law. According to police on Friday, Yoon has been booked on charges of special obstruction of public duty. However, as a sitting president, he cannot be criminally prosecuted. The Special Police Investigation Unit looking into the martial law declaration has reportedly obtained text messages between Yoon and PSS Deputy Chief Kim Sung-hoon regarding efforts to block the execution of the warrant to detain him. It was confirmed that they exchanged messages through the US-based messaging app Signal on January 3rd during the first attempt to serve the warrant. 4 days later, they exchanged messages again, with Yoon ordering the security team to intervene if a second attempt was made. Kim relayed the order to his staff, but they refused to comply, leading to Yoon's arrest on January 15th. The police did not disclose the details of the messages. Meanwhile, the Special Investigation Unit announced on Friday that they had transferred the case of 6 military officials, including Won Chun-hee, head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, to the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials. The officials were booked on charges of insurrection. The CIO launched a search and seizure procedure the same day at Won's house and office. It is investigating allegations that Won met with former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun and former commander of the Defense Intelligence Command Moon Sang-ho the day before Yoon's martial law declaration to discuss its imposition. 신하영, Arirang News.
Korean trade officials and business leaders were in Washington this week with key trade agenda between the two countries amid the Trump administration's tariff campaign. Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
As South Korea seeks tariff relief and stronger economic cooperation, both government and business leaders are making a united effort to secure favorable conditions for Korean firms operating in the U.S. According to the Trade Ministry on Friday, Deputy Trade Minister Park Jong-won met with senior U.S. officials from the White House, the Commerce Department, and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative during his visit to Washington, D.C. this week. He urged the U.S. to exempt South Korea from its new import tariff plans, citing the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement that has eliminated most tariffs on goods between the two nations, and highlighted substantial investments and contributions under the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act from South Korean firms. A South Korean delegation led by the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry Chairman Cha Tae-won also met with top U.S. officials in a bid to strengthen economic ties. During talks with senior White House officials, Cha emphasized that South Korean companies have invested over $160 billion in the U.S. manufacturing sector in the past 8 years, creating more than 80,000 high-quality jobs. Cha requested close cooperation between the two governments, while White House officials reportedly described discussions with the delegation as the most productive they have had with a private sector group. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Authorities have proposed up to 38% in anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese thick steel plates, following an investigation into their impact on the local market. Kim Jong-sil has more.
Hot-rolled carbon steel plates are thick sheets of steel primarily used in shipbuilding and construction. Last year, South Korea imported 1.38 million tons of it from China, 3 times the amount in 2021. This surge is attributed to China's struggling real estate market, which has pushed excess steel into overseas markets. In response, Hyundai Steel filed a complaint accusing Chinese producers of dumping the plates at unfairly low prices, harming South Korea's domestic industry. After an investigation, the Trade Commission proposed anti-dumping duties of up to 38% on Chinese hot-rolled carbon steel plates. The Ministry of Economy and Finance is expected to make the final call within a month.
With the tariff increase, industries such as shipbuilding and construction that rely on hot-rolled carbon steel plates will face more pressure due to rising raw material costs.
While some view this as protectionism, experts emphasize the measure does not target a specific country.
This anti-dumping measure is not aimed at a specific country, but rather targets specific companies that have engaged in unfair practices. And when these practices lead to harm to the domestic industry, this is a legal remedy to address the damage.
Many in the steel sector support the measure, with one official stating that the tariffs are essential to protect domestic production from unfair competition. However, the shipbuilding industry has raised concerns, with one official noting that higher steel prices will reduce profit margins and ship orders, ultimately harming the industry. Meanwhile, the government is set to begin anti-dumping investigations on Chinese and Japanese hot-rolled steel plates. 김정실, Arirang News.
New safety measures will be initiated for fire prevention, fishing operations, and aviation. At Friday's meeting between the government and the ruling People Power Party, they announced detailed measures to prevent the recurrence of recent accidents. Following a passenger aircraft accident that resulted in 179 casualties last year, landing facilities and bird strike prevention equipment at 7 airports nationwide will be improved. Also, due to consecutive fishing boat capsizings, fishing crews will receive free inflatable life jackets. And nearly 2,000 construction sites will be urgently inspected until March 17th, while fire safety laws will be revised to prevent massive on-site fires. On the international front, amid recent tensions between the U.S. and Ukraine, Ukraine's president met with Trump's envoy. Zelenskyy called the meeting productive, but a scheduled joint press conference was canceled. Choi Min-jung covers this event and more.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and U.S.-Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg met in Kyiv on Thursday and held what Zelenskyy called a productive meeting. Zelenskyy shared on social media that they had a detailed conversation about the battlefield situation, the return of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and effective security guarantees, emphasizing the importance of U.S.-Ukraine relations. However, the meeting did not result in significant breakthroughs in securing U.S. support, as evidenced by the cancellation of a planned joint press conference at the request of the U.S. What was supposed to be a media event turned into a brief photo opportunity without remarks or questions. Kellogg's visit to Kyiv came amid escalating tensions between U.S. President Donald Trump and Zelenskyy. On Wednesday, Ukraine rejected U.S. demands for $500 billion in minerals as repayment for wartime aid, citing inadequate support from Washington and a lack of security guarantees. Trump's frustration with Zelenskyy is apparent, as he believes Zelenskyy has not taken advantage of the opportunities presented.
Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelenskyy. The fact that that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly.
Additionally, the U.S. is resisting putting the blame on Russia for the war by opposing the inclusion of Russian aggression in a G7 joint statement marking the war's third anniversary. This follows Trump's comments blaming Ukraine for the war and calling Zelenskyy a dictator without elections. He has also proposed inviting Russia back to the G7. Next week, Trump is set to meet with the leaders of France and the UK to discuss strategies for ending the war in Ukraine and post-war planning. European nations have so far been left without a clear role in the peace talks. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Time now for our arts and culture segment. Our culture correspondent Song Yujin joins me here in the studio. Welcome, Yujin.
Happy Friday, Jungmin.
Happy Friday. What do you have for us today?
Well, Jungmin, I would like to say that here in Korea, at this time of the year, it's not the cherry on top. It's actually the strawberry, because we can see them everywhere, piling up at grocery stores, filling up shelves at the bakery, and also topping off desserts. But Korean strawberries, they are no longer just a seasonal favorite here in Korea, because they're making their way beyond our tables and into markets around the world. So for this week, I looked into the story behind Korean strawberries' success.
From cakes and tarts to canapes and salads and even sandwiches, strawberries dominate bakeries and restaurants across Korea this time of year. But their appeal isn't just local. While Southeast Asia has long been a key market, Korean strawberries are now expanding into new regions. Compared to 2021, exports to the Middle East jumped 40 times last year, while U.S. exports increased threefold.
Until the early 2000s, Japanese strawberries dominated exports to Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. But in 2002, Korea developed the Maehang variety, which has firmer flesh, a longer shelf life, and a sweeter taste, ideal for export. That was the turning point.
It all started here.
So here, the Strawberry Research Institute in Nonsan City, Chungcheongnam-do Province, is where Korea's signature strawberry varieties like this are developed. So far, researchers here have cultivated over a dozen unique varieties.
This institute introduced the internationally popular Maehang and then Seolhyang in 2005, which holds an 80% share of the domestic market. It's also home to trending varieties like Kingsberry, as large as a fist, and Vitaberry, known for its high vitamin content. Developing new strains is a rigorous process, typically taking 5 to 7 years.
We do it through selective breeding with a focus on taste and yield. The flavor must stand out to attract consumers, and a high-yield variety ensures stable supply.
This commitment has shaped the iconic flavor of Korean strawberries.
Korean strawberries offer a unique sweet-tart balance, which is different to many tropical fruits, for example. They also have a juicy texture and softer bite, which makes them especially popular among international consumers.
But the journey doesn't stop here, with researchers working to develop the breakthrough variety.
We're developing new varieties with improved durability for the sake of distribution. At the same time, as climate conditions change, we're also focusing on breeding disease-resistant strawberries.
It's a success story that's getting sweeter. And it looks like the best is yet to come.
It looks like a very good business, right? Eugene, while strawberries are in peak season here, they're typically known as a summer fruit in many other parts of the world. What makes Korea different?
Well, actually, strawberries used to be peak season in summer here in Korea at around early May. But thanks to advancement of farming technology, for example, greenhouse cultivation with precise temperature control, farmers are now able to harvest strawberries even cold winter months like this, which is the reason why we were able to visit the Strawberry Institute and film fresh strawberries. And what's really interesting is that winter strawberries take about a little more than 2 months to flower and harvest, compared to just 1 to 1.5 months for summer varieties. And this slower growth at lower temperatures allows the fruit to develop a denser, firmer texture and accumulate more nutrients, resulting in a sweeter and more flavorful berry. And there's also a strategic shift in marketing, because with fewer fruit options available in winter, producers began focusing on the colder months to meet consumer demand.
Fascinating. And Eugene, do you have any recommendations from the many strawberry varieties out there?
Well, I think this will be the very exciting part. So according to the Korea Strawberry Research Institute, so far Korea has developed around 60 to 70 varieties, but only a little more than 10 are currently available at the market. So if we could give recommendations to our viewers, researcher Yang, who appeared in my report, recommends Seolhyang, which is loved for its soft texture and sweetness. But I would like to recommend a newer variety to look out for, which is Joyberry, first introduced in 2023, because they're firmer and even sweeter than Seolhyang. And if you want something unique, there's also a variety called Durihyang, which is known for its unique fragrance. And this specific variety gained huge attention. It went viral online after BTS member Jin introduced it on his social media back in 2022.
Lots to explore. Thanks, Eugene.
My pleasure.
And on the subject of successful stories, a group of granny rappers in a remote Korean county is garnering quite a bit of attention for proving it's never too late to learn. Our Park Go-nu met up with them.
A community center in a small rural village of around 100 residents. This is where Suni and the Seven Princesses, a hip-hop group of women with an average age of 85, was formed 2 years ago. Overhearing joyful voices, I peeked inside.
안녕하세요. 뭐 하고 계셨어요?
한글 공부하고 있었어요.
Their life stories, woven into their lyrics, have brought fresh energy thanks to their regular Korean classes.
When I was young, I had to walk several kilometers to school because of the war, so I couldn't study. But learning Korean has opened my eyes.
They use fun methods like singing traditional Korean songs to improve. After class, they quickly transformed donning hip-hop gear and rapping like pros, a striking contrast to their Korean lessons. The Granny rappers show us that it's never too late to challenge yourself and speak your truth through your honest lyrics. Inspired by them, today I decided to try rapping. Together with the Grannies, we send our message to our viewers. 우린 너무 행복해요. 여러분도 행복하세요. Everybody happy. This group has offered hope and inspiration in South Korea, which turned into a super-age society last year with over 20% of the population aged 65 or older. Their success has even led to the creation of other elderly hip-hop groups. And they're boosting the local economy with merchandise featuring their faces, symbolizing the region. Their influence stretches beyond the local communities, performing at venues nationwide and even spreading globally. A documentary about them, directed by a Polish filmmaker, is set to be released later this year. The filmmaker shared her inspiration behind the project.
The project is to show to the other people that we are limitless, that we can change our lives no matter in which age we are currently in. We shouldn't have any excuses for anything, right? She started a rapping band in that age, so that's really impressive.
As the filmmaker hopes, Suni and the Seven Princesses will continue spreading their powerful message.
It's incredible we've come this far. If we can do it at this age, young people can too.
Emphasizing that she's already very happy, she said her only wish is for her and the members to stay healthy. 박건우, Arirang News, 7.
The cold is lasting for a long time. Currently, cold wave warnings and advisories are still in place for the whole country. Even during the daytime, temperatures stayed below 0 degrees nationwide. This freezing cold spell will persist until this weekend. The atmosphere is drying up day by day. In the East Coast areas where a dry weather warning is in effect, the wildfire crisis warning level was raised to caution level. With gusty winds blowing, please be careful not to cause any wildfires. Tomorrow morning will start off at below 0 degrees nationwide, with Seoul at -7 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at -11 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 2 degrees in Seoul, 5 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Starting from early next week, the weather will start to ease off a bit. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.
How to survive in Korea. Workplace. Step 1. Lunchtime. The most important morning routine is to check today's menu. Food is essential for survival. Memorize today's menu. The highlight of office life. Lunchtime. Rice in the bottom left, soup in the bottom right. The top is for the sides. The sauce and the spoon go here. This is the basic layout, but it's a bit odd to switch rice and soup. When you're done, pour the leftovers into the soup bowl. It doesn't look that appetizing, so wait until others are done eating. Step 2. Neng, nep, nenep. These are the most used expressions at work. Choose the most appropriate form. Neng, nep, nenep. Remember that the formal ne can sound a bit stiff. Did you just say yes? Absolutely not acceptable. You want to find the right word for the right occasion. Step 3. Desteria. Desteria is the oasis in the desert. Show them your character. If you're not the diligent type, get a stooky plant. Work is tough. Laugh and the whole world laughs with you. Weep and you weep alone. Stay put, like the stooky that survives in the desert. Hang in there until the end. Of course, you can always quit. You matter more than anything else. Step 4. Survival kit. Every worker needs a survival kit. Survival kit level 1. This position gets the most exposure. Grab one when you need a sugar boost. Always keep a few treats you can offer your co-workers. Survival kit level 2. These are for hunger pangs before and after a meal. You'll need them when you take a coffee break with your office buddies. Survival kit level 3. Trash talking your boss with your soulmate. Did you survive in the workplace? Office romance? Be careful. Even the photocopier knows all the gossip.
Our lives are swept into a vortex of this intricately connected world. Providing an in-depth exploration of global security, diplomacy, economy, and culture to offer a unique international perspective. Embark on a global news journey with the Geovista today.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. The impeachment trial of President Yoon Suk-yeol is entering a decisive phase, with the Constitutional Court set to conclude its hearings on February 25th. Over 10 sessions, the court has examined key testimonies, including those of Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and former National Intelligence Service Deputy Director Hong Jang-won, who presented a controversial memo allegedly listing politicians for arrest. The hearings have sparked intense debate over procedural flaws in cabinet meetings and President Yoon's role in past emergency measures. Meanwhile, Yoon's legal battles extend beyond impeachment as he faces a criminal trial on insurrection charges. Now, his legal team argues that his detention is unjust, adding another layer of complexity to his presidency. For a deeper analysis of the situation, we are joined by attorney An Jun-sung here in the studio with us. Welcome. And also joining us online is Lee Hee-yeon, Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School. Great to have you again, Professor.
Thanks for having me on the program.
So let us start with Mr. An. The 10th hearing of President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial took place yesterday, and previously the President Yoon's side has requested for a postponement, citing both criminal trial for insurrection charges and the impeachment hearing were scheduled at the same day, but the court has rejected this request. Before we get into the details of the hearing, could you tell us what was the reasoning behind the court's decision?
Yes, the Korean Constitutional Court came with several reasons. Most importantly, I think that the court found that there was sufficient time for the court procedures on the same day. For example, there was the preliminary hearing for the criminal case, which was set for 10 a.m. And also there was the 10th hearing for the impeachment trial, which was set for 2 p.m. So KCC found that that's kind of decided 4-hour difference, 2 events is sufficient, including maybe lunchtime, perhaps travel time between 2 different courts. And actually, the preliminary hearing for criminal trial took only 13 minutes, actually. So I guess in that respect, the court was right about it. And also there was a court mentioned that there's the reason they reject the postponement, request is that one of the reasons is that in the best interest of defendant, because on that day, the 3 witnesses which has been requested by the defendant side were supposed to be testify. So if they reschedule it, maybe it's not easy to get everybody on the same the trial day. So that's why they say come up with the idea rejection.
Right, so they considered a lot of details into the fact. But the 10th hearing, now let's go into the details. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo has testified and requested as a witness by President Yoon's team, but he consistently claimed that there were procedural flaws in past cabinet meetings. Professor Lee, with the direction of his comments, why do you think President Yoon's team chose to summon him as a witness? And also, what kind of impact do you think his testimony would have on the impeachment trial?
Well, I think the president's side chose to have the prime minister testify was basically to demonstrate that there was a justifiable basis for declaring martial law. So if you looked at the line of questioning from President Yoon's lawyers, they were basically trying to sort of identify situations where the National Assembly was basically being obstructionist when it comes to the running of state affairs. So, the accusation here basically is that the National Assembly, and from the Prime Minister's perspective, basically was trying to prevent the legislative agendas to be sort of put forward. So the Prime Minister and the questions that were being asked, particularly in relationship to, let's say, the impeachment of other state council members, various ministers that would effectively, basically hamper the work of the state council. Moreover, with respect to certain kinds of legislation as well, that the accusation here is that the National Assembly, being controlled by the Democratic Party, basically did not go forward with a number of the important things that the government was trying to produce in terms of legislation. So I think actually that was probably more of a political kind of a move in terms of the testimony offered by the Prime Minister to basically appeal to the public, saying that the National Assembly was dysfunctional essentially because it was being dominated by the Democratic Party. But in terms of the actual testimony on the other side, the National Assembly, I think, who are prosecuting this case, basically they were trying to show that the Prime Minister agreed that the whole process by declaring martial law, the procedures, which normally you have to have the State Council deliberate before the President can make a martial law declaration, that there were basically irregularities with respect to the State Council meeting. So the Prime Minister's testimony here, while I think President Yoon's side was trying to portray some sympathy for his position, I think in some sense may have backfired, because the Prime Minister, even though he did make a declaration that there was some irregularities with the State Council meeting before martial law was declared, that I think the opinion seems to be that maybe this was not done in the most efficient and most legal way possible.
Now, another point to talk about during the session yesterday was Hong Jang-won, former first deputy director of the intelligence agency, who's a key figure in determining whether President Yoon actually ordered the arrest of politicians during the martial law period, appeared in court. And he presented a memo of the politician arrest list, engaged in a heated debate, which caused a heated debate with President Yoon's side. So, Mr. An, what kind of aspects will the Constitutional Court focus in its judgment regarding the credibility of this memo?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I looked it up and what was happening and checked the actual memo. It's very interesting, the aspect there. And just, please note that the memo, Hong Jang-won, the memo has not been formally admitted as evidence at the court mainly because that it was allegedly drafted by someone else, third party. I think that about his assistant, not by himself. So it's not his testimony. Well, his testimony may be admissible, but the evidence produced by him, but which was allegedly made by someone else. So it's not admissible as the evidence. So I guess that's the issue of the admissibility of the evidence, whether they can court will admit that evidence, right? Also, so his testimony is one thing, and the evidence, such as the memo in question, is the another. So we have to wait and see what will happen. And also, however, once again, before we talk about the admissibility, it's more like it's unlikely that court. I think that unlikely the court will admit that evidence and with that memo as the evidence because of some of the problem with the the allegation about who drafted. Also, there's during the procedure, I think they talk about there were more than one copies of memo, maybe more or less 4 copies, and also it was allegedly drafted by someone else. So there's a credibility issue, and the present side will, defense team will keep challenging on the credibility of the evidence. But I think that from the legal perspective, although maybe it's unlikely that court will admit that evidence, or the memo as the evidence or the admissible evidence. However, I think that court might use it as a circumstantial evidence to infer to the circumstance that how the President Yoon did it, whether he did it. But it's not really showing his intent or his guilty mind. However, it can show the circumstance that there's most likely, if you see the circumstance that there was kind of pressure or even unwritten rule or something happening there, pressure or political pressure from his boss saying you have to do something. So I guess it's showing could they use it as a circumstantial evidence?
Right. So circumstantial evidence meaning they would not have it as a legal, evidence, but just help in understanding
more like
them.
Not directly proving that President Yoon order to do something.
It didn't directly.
And, but indirectly showing that there was kind of a circumstance. He felt that he ordering me something, and someone next to me wrote it down.
Right.
So it's kind of it's not really. So what's the problem here is you have to prove the intent. It's more like criminal case, right? So it's hard to prove the intent itself, but you can show the circumstance that you can infer the fact that maybe someone else might think that there's something happening there.
Right. So with a lot of things happening on the 10th hearing, now it had been concluded yesterday, and witnesses questioning in President Yoon's impeachment trial is essentially complete now. Professor Lee, do you believe the 10 hearings have provided a sufficient review of the case?
Well, I think it certainly depends on the side you're taking, but because obviously President Yoon's side will say that 10 hearings are not enough. They want the full 180 days, but I don't think that's obviously realistic here, given that the court really wants to expeditiously move this case forward. And so I think you need to sort of evaluate this question in terms of what evidence has been presented thus far, and does the court have enough to either decide to impeach or to not impeach. And I think if you sort of look at what we've heard and the evidence that's been submitted at this point, I think it seems to be that the court could make some decisive decision at this point as to determining whether or not, the president engaged in acts that were impeachable. And so remember, what we're dealing here with is the constitutional sort of standard here as to whether or not the president did something that is raised to the level of some sort of constitutional liability that could justify his removal from office. And so I suspect that, again, if you're on either side of the question, it does appear, though, that the court gave additional time, right? They originally were going to have only 8 hearings, and they added a couple of more hearings to accommodate, the witness requests of the prime minister as well as others. And so I think the court was trying to sort of walk a fine line between, obviously having a fair trial and giving the president due process, while at the same time ensuring that there was an efficient trial. So I think 10 hearings in terms of witnesses, and then you'll have a final hearing, of course, when it comes to the final arguments, as far as the final closing statements made by each side. And, in comparison to the previous impeachment cases with President Moon and President Park, this won't certainly get to the level of President Park's impeachment in terms of, how many arguments, as well as the number of time it took in terms of reaching a decision. But in that case, of course, there were probably more complex issues, more factual assertions there. And certainly this case has been longer than President Moon's impeachment trial. So I think you're sort of finding sort of a period in between. And so I think a lot of people will judge this to be generally fair. But again, if you're the defense, you obviously want as much time as you can. So I think the 10 hearings as far as witnesses, and then of course the 11th, I think there's been a sufficient amount of evidence presented at this point where the court can make a informed decision.
Right, so it really depends on which side you're in, but it's a fact that it had extended and had added some hearings to the current ones. Now, with a total of 16 witnesses, they're done testifying. Mr. An, having followed the hearings as a legal expert, which kind of testimonies do you think have had the most decisive impact on the trial's outcome?
Well, as Professor Lee mentioned earlier, right? I think out of 16, witnesses, I think the Prime Minister Han Duck-soo was most decisive in many aspects. First of all, I think he was requested by the president's legal team, right? So he was supposed to be, testify for him, but in reality, I think that from legal perspective, it really helped him much. Actually, maybe the other way around, I think, and because that he reaffirmed that that there was a procedural flaw during the cabinet meeting on the prior to the martial law declaration on December 3rd. So I think that's really critical. He didn't change his position at all. Although he sounds like retracts a little bit, saying that I'm not sure whether it's legal or illegal about the formality issue, but he did say basically I'm not in a position to make any decision or judgment call whether the cabinet meeting was properly convened or not, right? So also I think he confirmed again that there was no consent process. Basically, all the cabinet members not attended that time all strongly disagree, and he also said that I strongly disagree with President on that matter. That's really hurt him, President Yoon very much, because more like a double-edged sword to the President Yoon's legal team, because that it really showing that he actually did it and what he meant to do. So I think this is a very serious situation. And then, yeah, so I guess when I'm seeing, and plus what happened was that there was interesting happened, President was kind of get out of the room, come back later on, because, he basically saying that allegedly we're arguing that there was a political issue, we don't want to get president and prime minister on the same courtroom at the same time, but maybe he wasn't not sure whether what kind of thing he testified. Han Duck-soo is very seasoned politicians. Have a decades of career, so he knows what to do, what not to do. So I guess maybe he tried to avoid the confrontation situation with him. So I guess.
Right, especially with Han Duck-soo being Yoon's witness, it also definitely dealt an impact to the situation. Now, the Constitutional Court has decided to conclude the impeachment hearings on February 25th. Professor Lee, what key issues will be addressed in the final hearing? And also, can you tell us what will be the next steps in the legal process after this?
Well, essentially, what the court, and I sort of following up on Attorney An's point about, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo's testimony, because, one of the biggest questions is, was there, a justifiable basis for declaring martial law? And then once martial law was declared, its imposition, was the imposition of it and implementation of it done in a constitutionally valid way? So when it comes to this question, those really are the highlighting issues that are going to decide this case. And so with respect to just the arguments that have been presented thus far, the court's going to have to look at whether or not there was a constitutional basis and whether the procedures themselves were followed. So, on the National Assembly side, this is the prosecuting side. They're going to say that this is totally unconstitutional, because when you're talking about martial law, you're talking about a national emergency, something that's akin to a war or civil war disturbance or some sort of national emergency of the highest order that will require martial law to be declared. There was no such incident in Korea at the time. There was no war going on. North Korea was not invading. There was no internal disturbance of the magnitude that would justify that. So the National Assembly side is going to say, of course, there was no factual basis to determine this, and moreover, there was a procedural flaw with respect to how martial law was declared, because the State Council did not deliberate and give its recommendation to the president. In fact, Prime Minister seemed to suggest very clearly that the State Council was kind of resisting the recommendation for making martial law, and they were trying to persuade him not to go through with it. So in that respect, I think that's going to be one of the biggest questions on that question. But then, of course, on the other hand, about the imposition and implementation, if it's found that the president had ordered National Assembly members to be arrested and dragged out of the National Assembly for the purpose of obstructing any vote towards canceling martial law, that would also be another basis for impeaching the president. So I think we're looking at the questions of the imposition, the decision to make martial law and implement it, and then how was it executed. I think that's going to be the focus of the Constitutional Court's decision as to whether or not the president should remain in office.
Right, and could you also tell us about the next steps after the hearing is held?
Absolutely. Well, once the hearings are held, of course, the court's going to have to deliberate. So we'll have final closing arguments essentially made by each side. They'll present their final viewpoints as to how this case should be resolved. And then the court will take probably about 2 weeks to deliberate and then make its final decision. And so at that point, the court will then make a public final decision as to whether or not to whether or not the impeachment should be upheld and that President then Yoon should be removed from office, or whether or not impeachment should be denied. And then he can immediately return to office. And so, the whole country, of course, will be waiting with bated breath, essentially, probably by early to mid-March, when the court will then make its final decision.
Now, let's also talk about the authority dispute case regarding acting President Choi Sang-mok's decision not to appoint Ma Eun-hyuk as a Constitutional Court justice. It's still awaiting the final date. Why hasn't the court set a final date for its ruling, Attorney An?
Yes, I think there's also a very interesting situation, because if you look at the fact, go back to the timeline, and what happened was that the acting prime minister / acting president, right, and he decided not to appoint the last justice for the Korean Constitutional Court, because in a way maybe he believes that that's the way to helping his boss during the litigation. However, what happened was that at this moment things have changed. Right. So what happened was that now they're using the Yoon's legal team using that situation for their advantage, try to, delay the process delay, right? So what happened was they want to delay it as a delay tactic, so that basically what one was in the technicality issue, procedurally, if there's change of the bench in constitutional court, they supposed to have restart, actually resume the process. Basically, what they do is like whoever join later have to understand what we're going on and listen to the doesn't have to be literally listen to it. They can listen to the recordings and check the evidence. That will take considerable time. So I guess that the Yoon's legal team tried to buy more time to delay it as much as they're possible. But in reality, I don't think that there's the ball in the constitutional court side, so they will decide what to do. And the problem was that we know that in the April there are 2 justices will be retired. Mm-hmm. So if you delay anymore, there's going to be more problem in the April. So what we try to do is they targeting to finish up everything in sometime in March before the April, so that they don't have some problem with technical issue about how many justices on the bench.
Right. So we'll have to wait until that time. Now, let's also touch upon Yoon's detention before we let you go. President Yoon Suk-yeol has now been booked on suspicion of obstructing the execution of his own detention warrant, and police say he instructed the Presidential Security Service to block investigators attempting to detain him. But as far as we know, he's a sitting president, so he's immune for these charges. Given this circumstances, what legal and political implications could this have on the ongoing legal proceedings, Professor Lee?
Right. So as you noted, according to the Korean Constitution, Article 84 provides that the president cannot be charged with any criminal offense other than, insurrection or treason. And so any other crimes that the prosecution or the police are accusing him of, while he's a sitting president, he's immune from criminal prosecution. So those charges, if he remains the president, cannot be basically brought against him. So depending on the outcome of the impeachment, basically, if President Yoon is found not to be impeached and he remains in office, all of those charges that have been brought against him, again, with the exception of insurrection, can be brought forward in terms of the criminal proceedings against him. So when it comes to this question, then essentially what the prosecutors and the police are doing is they're kind of biding their time on this question and probably betting in some sense that the Constitutional Court is going to impeach the president. And so I think what you're seeing here is the strategy on part of the prosecution as well as the police that, it looks like that the president will be in fact impeached. And if he is impeached, then he loses immunity. He's removed from office. He just becomes like any ordinary Korean citizen. Now, certainly he was a president, but his immunity only extends to his official capacity as he is the president. So in this case, as we've seen in the past in Korean history, presidents have been prosecuted and put in jail. And so I think what we're going to see here politically as well as legally, we're going to see a huge seismic shock either way when it comes to whether the Constitutional Court decides either to impeach the president or to keep him in office. And so at that point, once those decisions are made, then the dominoes will then fall when it comes to the legal issues that the president is facing, with the exception of the insurrection charge, which potentially can still move forward because under the Constitution, he can be convicted of an insurrection charge.
Right. So with the latest allegations on obstruction added to the mix, we'll have to keep tabs on how these legal developments could shape the next chapter of South Korea's political landscape. We will have to conclude our discussion right here. Thank you so much, Attorney An.
Thank you.
And Professor Lee, for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.